Hi, my name is John Kozinski, and we'll be talking about how to avoid deficiencies of B12 in a vegan diet. B12 is a substance that sometimes by certain vegan advocates are downplayed. And without mentioning names, but there's some famous doctors who will say, oh, you only have to take an occasional B12 supplement or something once a week, take a B12 supplement or eat some fortified food because we need to eat so little B12. I've seen personally over the last almost 40 years of counseling many problems with people and some really serious disorders that arose from B12 deficiencies, such as schizophrenia and brain damage in children. So it is a real issue that we should address. It's not one of those issues that I believe you can just flow over without addressing, and I believe some of these doctors are being irresponsible in that way. Early signs of B12 deficiency are things like unusual fatigue or faulty digestion, no appetite, nausea for women, lack of menstruation. And then overt B12 deficiencies is things like diarrhea that won't stop, nervousness, numbness and tingling of the hands and feet is a big one, striking behavioral changes, paranoia, impotence, impaired memory, infertility, a sore tongue, and neurological changes are important to address because what happens is if that you don't address them, the damage can become irreversible that a person has. And to avoid B12 deficiencies if a diet is totally vegan, we really need to take a B12 supplement. And B12 absorption is B12 dependent. So one of the things that happens is that when you're not taking B12 in diet, which is only in animal foods, it's not in seaweed, it's not in tempeh, like some advocates will say. In tempeh and seaweed and miso, there's something called an analog. It's a fake B12. But if we're not taking B12 in some form, the irony is that the absorption of B12 through your digestive tract is dependent on having enough B12. So then you have to take it in a sublingual form, one that you melt under your tongue. So the base way to do that also is to take, there's a form of B12 called methylcobalamin. Cobalamin is the chemical name for B12. And if you've been vegetarian for a while, then you should really melt this under your tongue and basically then do that every day for a few months. And then you might be able to take 2,000 micrograms every day. When you take a lot of it, you don't absorb a lot of it. Now, some people will go and get blood tests, and they'll say, oh, my B12 is fine or high in the blood test. The problem is that if you get a blood test and it's very good with B12, but you're taking a lot of greens, the folic acid gives a false reading. A more effective way of doing that is to get a urine test, a special urine test. And even then, there's some other tests that can be done. Many years ago, a woman came to me at one of the conferences, the Natural Health Macrobiotic conferences, and told me some of her symptoms, and I said, sounds like you have a B12 deficiency. And I told her about how greens will cover up the B12 in the blood, give a false reading. So after doing some very sophisticated tests, she found it out that she wasn't absorbing her B12, and she wasn't even absorbing the B12 that was going under her tongue, and she had to take shots. And there are some people who are so B12 deficient, they need to take shots. And as I said, this is something that's a serious issue you have to really address if you're not going to eat natural animal food. And the interesting thing about this is that there are more and more people who eat animal food, who eat the modern diet, who are becoming B12 deficient because it's an absorption issue. And many people eating modern diets because of eating junk food and too much processed food and poor quality meats, they basically start to have poor digestion, so they're not absorbing well. So here's some ways that you could avoid deficiencies. Here are some of the ways you can avoid deficiencies on a vegan diet.